Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Gäste,
ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, we are becoming the Humboldt Forum. This is the motto for our first season, and we originally thought that we would get started in December of 2020 with the first exhibitions and the educational offerings, and following Easter, the third pillar of our program, the cultural events. Now the situation is different, but nonetheless we are starting the events today, and I'm very happy that all of you are present. I'd like to welcome you as the director, also on behalf of everybody involved on the occasion of this first event that we are broadcasting live from the Humboldt Forum. Unfortunately, we are starting without an audience, but at least you can join us live, which is something that we've almost gotten used to already, but I hope that we will soon be able to meet here in this site and have an exchange on what we are doing digitally today. Starting today, every Thursday, in cooperation with all of the stakeholders, the Humboldt Forum will discuss central issues from society, politics from abroad and from Germany. We are discussing with different guests, we are having different perspectives, and we are focusing on 4 different series that all have their very special focus, and we're looking at the 3 core issues of the site from different vantage points: colonialism, coloniality, the Humboldt brothers and what they and their heritage still mean for us today, and also the many aspects that are related to the history of this site. We want to take up topics that are of contemporary importance and relevance for society, for the discussions surrounding a better joint tomorrow. Some might be of local relevance, others definitely of an international relevance. We want to contribute with these discussions to really develop a forum here, a place of encounters, of meeting, of listening to each other, of talking to each other, of listening to each other, but also a place where contradictions have to be accepted and ambiguities are accepted. But there's this principle, don't talk about us without us. We don't want to talk about others, but with people from all over the world. Everybody should be able to make a contribution, so this really becomes the Humboldt Forum. We're starting with the series 99 questions, designed to last 1 year. It always focuses on important questions for the way we are dealing with colonial collections, the history, but also their importance for us, both for today and for the future, and the collections that are found and their importance for museums and society. Those are the central questions asked by 99 questions. Today we have a high-level group put together with the Ethnological Museum and the Museum for Asian Art of the State Museums in Berlin, and we are going to ask on the importance of Ethnological Museum in a global context. Not only do we have discussion events here at the Humboldt Forum starting next week, you will also be able to purchase a book that has just been published, Post-Colonialism and Cultural Heritage. It's also available in German and by Hansa. Contributions by renowned experts that were involved in the discussions surrounding the Humboldt Forum and that have put together these contributions with a view to the tasks and challenges of the Humboldt Forum in this volume. So I believe this is very good reading material to understand what we are dealing with when it comes to the global issues. On April 22nd, Ortstermin will begin, which is another important topic, namely inclusion. What are the offerings that we're making for people with special needs? We're doing this in the Humboldt Forum. How are we dealing with the big task of inclusion, an issue that for our society has become of big central importance? And at the same time, we are also looking at the history of this site. And in in 2 weeks, in cooperation with the Humboldt University in Berlin, we are beginning the series Science and Humanities. It's the continuation of the famous Cosmos lectures by Alexander von Humboldt, who 200 years ago explained the world from a global scientific perspective. And it's about scientists sharing their top-notch research with the audience. And by doing this, we are getting little glimpse into the 7 clusters of excellence of the Berlin universities. At the current point in time, it's about the current ecological crisis that requires a rethinking when it comes to the relationship of technology and nature. And the last series will begin on May 6th. It is called Counter Questions. We know that all phenomena are interacting with each other. We've known that since Alexander von Humboldt. And when it comes to counter questions, we want to look at current challenges and events from the realm of culture, politics, different experiences and attitudes, and maybe find out surprising interconnections and influences between culture and nature, science and art, the globe and the nation, the individual. What exactly it is, have a look at our newsletter, have a look at our digital offerings, and following this event, there will be a very dynamic pool that's being developed. This is very typical for what is being discussed here at the Humboldt Forum, and you will be able to learn there what is happening on the 6th and who will be speaking. Thank you very much to everybody who was involved in the design, development, and production of all of these events. I'm looking forward to seeing how the Humboldt Forum really becomes a place of encounter, and I'm now giving the floor to the host of this kickoff event, Prasanna Oman, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion on ethnological museums in a global context. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Dankeschön, Herr Dorgalow. Thank you, Mr. Dorgalow. Hello, a very warm welcome to all of you. Wherever you are, perhaps hiding in the basement from all-day home family members, or still focused and highly concentrated in your study in the probably 33rd video conference of the day. We are anyway thrilled that you joined us today. And please let me just use a couple of minutes for a brief introduction and outline. My name is Prasanna Oman. I'm a moderator, author, and communication consultant, and I usually work on transformations in culture and education with a particular focus on diversity and digitization. And I'm not from the capital, I'm a Rhineländerin from the cozy city, Cologne. And of course, I'm quite intimidated by this magnificent building, even in this studio. Dear Berlin, coming from a city which is not really a beauty queen, I must admit the wow effect really works quite well. And this brings me straight to the heart of the matter. You can imagine that my initial naive joy about hosting the very first discussion in the Humboldt Forum was very quickly replaced by a great nervousness. After all, there is no cultural institution in Germany that has triggered as much controversy, resistance, and rejection. To make it short, a heavily loaded building of power worth 700 million euro taxpayers' money. The refusal to return the Benin bronzes, the Savoy-Sarr report, then the surprising announcement that the matter of restitution of the bronzes should be supposedly solved within this year, followed by the mention from the Minister of State for Culture that empty spaces in our exhibitions would also be okay, because after all, it could contextualize our history. Seriously? That's it? We all know it won't happen as simple as that. Considering the history to this struggle, it's comprehensible that Kwame Opoku, which you all know, wrote a long article just 10 days ago with the headline, "Will Germany really restitute looted Benin artifacts?" But let's not get distracted from the big question marks. Better focus on why we're here. We want to set a multi-vocal dialogue in motion inside and outside the Humboldt Forum, as Mr. Dorgalow just said. Here we want to explore the pressing questions about how to deal with the colonial collections long-term. To put it as simple as that, we want to look at the future role of the ethnological and other museums which contain looted art. In terms of transparent reappraisal of the colonial crimes and theft, and including critical self-reflection regarding neo-colonialism. This is obviously the only way to build the Humboldt Forum into a learning institution, which is relevant in the present and the future. Let me now introduce the series. 99 Questions is a one-year-long discourse series at the Humboldt Forum. 12 months, 12 discussions, and 99 questions. That makes 8.25 questions per event. I don't know if we stick to that, but we try. The series is a cooperation between the Ethnological Museum Berlin, the Museum of Asian Art Berlin, and the Humboldt Forum Foundation. It is curated by Michael Dieminger. Dear participants, since I have the honor and also the burden of piloting this series today, please note that today is an experiment. We haven't done anything like this before here in this space, and we aim to touch several topics, plus we also want to convey the complexity in an accessible way, which is not easy at all. You can be sure we won't hide behind this complexity, as it was done several times before, I promise. Within this next year, we will dig deeper in major topics regarding the colonial collections, human remains, its provenance, cultural heritage, and of course, restitution. And the purpose of an authentic, multivocal approach in every sense will also be supported by the concept of changing moderators. I myself will guide you through the first 3 discussions and will hand over to a diverse range of wonderful, competent colleagues. It is very important that we are not acting out this discussion on our own. We really need you. The space can only transform in an authentic, democratic space if you interact with us. How you do that, I will tell you later. When I announce the VoxR link, you can just click on it below the stream and below our CVs, and then place your questions. But we will do that later again together. We will include some of your questions within 2 slots in the schedule. Please excuse me if I can't take all. It's always like in the present events. We will try to submit as much as possible. And we will also find a way to answer your unanswered questions in a different format. One request from the heart, please talk to each other or put your posts in a respectful way. Let's try all together to follow an etiquette in the digital space, even if we disagree, with patience, sustainable stubbornness, and of course, also a great sense of humor. So, this was definitely enough of the facilitator's duties and appeal. Let's move to our topic. It's crystal clear that this first event carries an overload of expectations towards a clear statement on the state of the looted art discussion regarding the Benin bronzes. I'm really looking forward to a hopefully fruitful discussion with our guests and you. So please stay tuned and enjoy the discussion with 4 inspiring guests. So I start introducing the first guest. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Wiebke Ahrndt. She has been working as the director of the Übersee-Museum in Bremen since 2002. She is with us today because she has also led the publication of 2 seminal guidelines issued by the Deutsche Museumsbund, the German Association of Museums, of which she has also been vice president for several years. One publication discusses the care of human remains, while the other offers guidelines for the care of collections from colonial contexts. In our preliminary talk, she said, I quote, We also included political demands in the guidelines. It is really important that funding for digitization, for provenance research, and for international cooperation is secured in the future. This is the basis for constructive and sustainable cooperations, unquote. We are very happy to have you here on our first panel. Welcome, Wiebke Ahrndt. Now I would like to welcome a guest from Senegal, Dr. El Hadji Malick Ndiaye. He holds a doctorate in art history and was trained as a curator at the National Institute of Heritage in Paris. He is the new head of the Department of Museums at the Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire at the University Cheikh Anta Diop of Dakar, Senegal. Besides lots of other functions, he also serves as the Secretary General of the International Council of Museums, ICOM, Senegal. In our preliminary talk, he said, I quote, "Provenance is important, but it is also a European strategy not to restitute. We need to put the restitution first and not the serving of science," unquote. Welcome, dear Malick. I'm very happy that you're here, and I'm looking forward to your illustration of this remark. And then I'd like to welcome Emmanuel Kasarhérou. He started his career at the young age of 25 when he became the director of the Musée territorial de Nouvelle-Calédonie. Sorry, I don't speak French, so I really try hard to pronounce it well. Ever since, he has been working in several countries and institutions with collections from Kanak culture. To explain it in the German context, this term refers to the indigenous inhabitants of New Caledonia. Today, he is the president of the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. And in this function, he is the first indigenous director of a major French museum. I also want to share a quote from him with you. Quote, "I don't consider the collection as a series of the same and the similar. I always think that each object is like an individual. It has its own personal history that we have to look after in its singularity," unquote. Dear Emmanuel, we are very delighted that you're here with us, especially because you're an expert in precise case-by-case studies. And now I'm very happy to welcome one of our hosts who is here with me in the studio on the stage, Professor Dr. Lars-Christian Koch. He is, as many of you know, the director of the Ethnological and the Asian Art Museum in Berlin, as well as the director of collections at the Humboldt Forum. With his research focus on ethnomusicology, he did fieldwork in India and South Korea. He is currently also a professor at the University of Cologne, as well as a honorary professor at the University of Arts in Berlin. When we talked, he said, quote, "We have made the first returns, so it is going further, and I can only say that we are in process of catching up. We want to be more transparent. For this purpose, we are developing structures inside and outside," unquote. Welcome, Lars. It's a pleasure to meet you here after so many years. We know each other from Cologne and met here by just coincidence. And Lars Koch is working. I met him when he was working in arts education. So let's start right away, Lars. You get the opening question. The Humboldt Forum is, frankly spoken, a contested space. So my first question is twofold. First, why is there so much discussion about the space? And second, will or can you tell us what led the Humboldt Forum to this major change of plans, returning the Benin bronzes as quickly as possible? Why did you speed up so suddenly?
Okay, thanks, Prasanna. The first question is, for us, the Humboldt Forum as a building is not contested. I would say it's challenging. Challenging as so far as the outer facade. The building itself definitely resembles the Prussian heritage. So we have set up From the outside, you see the history, also the colonial history, though it's a reconstruction. Inside, we have exhibitions based on a lot of objects coming out of a colonial context. For us, it's a challenge to transform this place into a place where we can just have a discourse on these problems of colonialism, of ethnographic and ethnological museums, of the cooperative and collaborative works we are just undertaking with our partners from a global setup, I would say. And this also leads to your second question. It doesn't come out of the blue that we are just discussing this topic like the Benin Browse. For the last years, and also my predecessor started in this way, we are just concentrating much more on provenance research and on cooperation with our partners globally. In this way, we definitely would not say discovered, but we made more prominent what kind of collections we are dealing with. Mm-hmm. And we started our first negotiations with the so-called source communities, and we also repatriated a few objects. And speeding up is just a thing you see from the outside, because we just got a new department for provenance research. 4 of our colleagues are just concentrating and working on this, so we get much more information. We get much more connections and contacts to the source communities to discuss these specific topics. Coming back to Benin, it's already discussed openly that we are part of the Benin Dialogue Group. So these discussions are going on for quite some years now. Mm-hmm. There are bigger projects, research projects, also inside Germany and Europe. And out of these projects, we are negotiating with our partners in Nigeria how to follow up their idea of establishing a museum over there in Benin. And we are also just much clearer now with whom to participate, with whom to cooperate.
Can I just interrupt there? The dialogue group is also highly criticized. I have the feeling they lost lots of trust because also of the time, the slow speed. Can you tell us something about that?
I think it's only the way of negotiating what you are doing with all the different partners. Mm-hmm. I would just give an example a little bit outside of this area of Nigeria. Whenever we are just dealing with so-called source communities, we have different partners we have to deal with. Might be a nation state, might be the community itself, and it's just different where you work in the field of restitution. If you're just, for example, working in New Zealand or Australia, you have pretty clear structures how to follow up this process. So even if you're just saying we have a collection over there, you can contact somebody. So and this negotiation is going on. In Nigeria, we also had different partners, and this is what Hartmut Dorgalo said in the beginning. We want to talk with the people, not about the people. So we have to find our partners, and they have to also negotiate how they are just proceeding the process. And Hermann Partzinger always said we are open also for restitution in the case of Benin.
Yes, that's true.
And this is what we are.
That's true, but I think there's still a lack of transparency, but we come to that later. Mm-hmm. That's why we're doing this here. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Lars. We start now to the discussion, which we divided in 3 parts and 3 sections. The title of the first section is Collections from Colonial Context and Processes of Restitution, which we already addressed. Malik, I noticed in many panels and events in the past years, whenever we discuss transformations of museums, of theaters, wherever in the cultural field, the language suddenly becomes very formal, very technical. In German, we call it Fachsprech. And it seems a little bit like a red herring, a strategy of distraction, like you said in our preliminary talk, Malik. Can you tell me what does it actually mean when we name a collection colonial? Is it the context of injustice, which is important to the label? Or is it simply the fact that these collections, whether looted or not, belong to the countries of origin? I know it's a long question, but you're capable of splitting it up. Otherwise, you ask me again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Prasanna. I would like first, before answering to your question, to congratulate and to say many thanks to Humboldt Forum for organizing this very big, discussion. And I quote two words that I love so much: contradiction and ambiguity. So these are the vision of Humboldt Forum, and it is great. It is great. I should like to say that. And I am pleased also to be in this discussion with these two colleagues that I know and I respect for their job. For the question of, colonial collection, it is maybe it's easy, maybe difficult. For me, when we determine that a particular collection is colonial, there is a range of a whole set of facts that contribute to making us say so. First of all, we have maybe a historical context of collection, because we are in the colonial context. It is a context of colonization, so of colonial domination, in which Africans were stripped of their property, and because they did not have the right to say a single word, nor to express themselves, and could not decide on anything. They were not asked their opinion on what to do. These objects are collected in this context of unequal power relationship. This so invalidates many arguments about the legality of the presence of this object in a European collection, and that's why we can't understand why the reports are so explain the context, the historical context. It's very important. Maybe the second reason to explain what does it mean, colonial collection, is the actor, the people who collect. These people who collect in the name of a supposedly superior civilization, in many cases, demonstrate unprecedented barbarity. And we have a big book from Michel Leiris who demonstrates how collection was done with those persons and what was the attitude of those persons. So this is probably the reason why the collected objects are the frustration of society that had no right. Mm-hmm. And this is where injustice that you called, and maybe outrage, in English we say outrage, I think, of tradition and culture, of memory and history can be noticed. So this condition of people make bigger, reinforce the colonial definition of an organized collection at the time. Maybe another reason, another fact to determine what does it mean a colonial collection is the reason for which the objects were collected. Here, what we should understand is that if we come back to history, first museum established on the continent were at the service of colonization and imperialism. The creation of this museum is the consequence of the interest of colonial power concerned with the exploitation of African resources. So the first...
Sorry?
Go ahead.
No. Please finish your sentence. That's a delay.
So the first museum established were concentrated on mining and industrial exploitation, and that's why those museums were focused on archaeology, and at those times also ethnology, ethnography come, and it was very easy that ethnography come with in this context because ethnographic science was informed by the method of natural science, the classification.
Let me just add one question, because you're talking about the disbalance of power structures in this collection world. You also use the term of resocializing the objects. Is this in the context of the power disbalance which you addressed? We can't hear you right now. Sorry, we can't hear you. So I just ask the team. We can still not hear you. Malik, now. No. This happens. This is so. No, we will hear you. We will wait for your answer.
I lost the last sentence.
Okay.
Of your question.
Okay. No, I was asking about the term you use pretty often, the resocialization of the objects. They have to be re-socialized. So is this in the context of the disbalance you were addressing?
Maybe, you know, when an object, as Emmanuel said in the preliminary discussion, I agree totally, you know, any single object is a singularity. And when we talk about resocialization, it doesn't mean that many people in our university, in our country, say that we don't need those objects coming back. In their opinion, object cannot be transformed. So when we talk about resocialization, we mean that those objects were outside with another semantic, another signification, many other interpretations. And maybe at the beginning when they were collected, we have also archive and documentation that are many of them transform the sense of the object. So resocialized objects mean to reintegrate them in our mainstream, in the museum, in society, in everywhere, even in our imaginary.
Thank you so much, Malik. Emmanuel, the central demand of the Savoy-Sarr report is that the colonial collections must be ultimately returned to the countries of origin. Looking at my quote when I introduced you, just a very simple question. Do you agree? And I just add something to it. You have said that the report seems a bit militant, and that it has shaken up things, which you also think is positive. What could a less militant and style be in restitution? And, for instance, the case-by-case process, which you are favoring?
Well, thank you very much and for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be with you and to talk with all my colleagues around these questions. Yes, I have a bit of a question about the term colonial context, colonial collection, because it seems to apply to a lot of different collections, history, a lot of different situations in the past. And sometimes it seemed for me a wording which is too broad to approach the right question. But I understand it's an important fact to be put, and that's what in the report, the Sarr report, which yes, it was in my opinion very with passion and eloquency address the question of historical responsibility for museum, with the question of the origin of their collection. And I think that, of course, we have to look at our own history. And the history of collection and the history of object, it's the main task to carry on to achieve the goal which was put in front by the report. I do agree that, of course, all looted art should be should find its way to its country of origin, but we have to inquire and about the the fact that it was acquired it was looted, in fact. So we have to work around. We have to make research. It's not so easy, but it's very interesting because it's a way to address the question of history and the colonial history. And I think that the less militant way to do it, it's probably to address the question case by case and situation by situation, and finding the right partners on the other side to work with us on a specific collection dealing with one specific culture at one specific time, which has been which make question. So this is the way I will try to push.
Yeah, but this affects, what you suggest affects the temporality. So it's really, I mean, if you do a case by case, it takes even more time, isn't it?
Of course it takes time, but it is the time of the research. It's not the time of communication of politics. When you make a research, you need time. And I think we really need to do it properly and not to do it too quickly and make strong mistakes. We can feel it on when today, when sometimes you have some kind of running circulation of demand of something to be done quickly. I'm afraid that we have to take our time on each side to inquire properly about the situation and then find a way for this object to go back.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Wiebke, even if we talk in the next section about guidelines, I just wanted to ask you, because when it comes to temporality, how did you feel it while writing, or why? I mean, this was a long process, 4 years, I think, writing the guideline. Did you feel the pressure, the time pressure, that something had to happen, and now we have the statement that it's going to happen? Did you feel that?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's really that a lot of people are waiting that something happens, and it's quite difficult to explain that things take time. And I really believe that Emmanuel is right in saying that we have to take this time not only to do the research, but also to do the communication, because the answers are quite difficult on our side, but also on the communities of origin. It very often needs time, very often needs years. I think, especially here in Germany, my impression is that we took a long time to realize that we have a colonial past and that we have a colonial heritage where we have to talk about and we have to find solutions. But now we discovered that we suddenly want to have the answers very, very fast. And I just believe that there are no easy, fast answers. It's quite complicated. And collections in German ethnological museums are stemming from all over the world. From different kind of colonial context. And I think we have to look at all these different contexts. I know it's complicated, and I know that a lot of people expect easy answers, but I'm afraid there aren't easy answers. And the more questions we ask, the more questions we will have as answers. It's quite a complicated case.
Thank you so much, Wiebke, for this assessment. Lars, cross your heart. If the activists wouldn't have built this pressure, if there wouldn't have been this pressure, where would the Humboldt Forum be today? Just, you know, if nobody had asked these questions or things were not shaken up. Be honest.
I think the answer is pretty simple. We are just here for having dialogues. We are just here for getting pressure. And we are just here to transform this place into a new site of a kind of, let's say, new museum structure, new exhibition space, and a more dialogue form of exhibiting all the collections we have. Exactly what Wiebke and Emmanuel were just saying. We just want to be transparent in all the time we are taking in researching. And I must stress, we are just out for cooperations with our partners from the so-called South communities, and presenting all this process and all the research we do here. we already started a couple of years ago in Collection is also working with activist groups, not yet in the Humboldt Forum, but hopefully we will just be in a stage to do so in the future, in the near future, I hope. And these are working on the collections, especially on colonial context. I'm saying a couple of years ago, one example is Tanzania, the bigger Tanzania project. We had some very good results. We had the community here. We had comparative and cooperative projects in this setup. Mm-hmm. We just made transparent what kind of collections we had, what kind of colonial context. Our partners were just negotiating our collection and putting out what kind of objects they are expecting back. Mm-hmm. And we are open to do so. And this is the process we are just in.
So the communication is getting better. I summarize, we are already at the end of the first section. So we need time. We can't avoid that it takes time to restitute. We will get into this subject more in the next discourse event or in the next panel discussion, but we need better communication strategies and need more transparency. I want to introduce the next section. You see, I really just tip on the topics. It's not long and evolved, but we will do that later on. At the moment, cultural institutions seem to me less like old masters, as often invoked, but much more as if they were going through puberty. They are in search of orientation. They have to break away from the old. And deep down, they are, of course, aware of their mission and values. The scandal during the redefinition process of museum tasks in the ICOM, in the International Council of Museums, was an example of how heated the debate is. Sometimes guidelines can work wonders for transformation processes, provided that they are flexible, hands-on, and also represent diversity of voices. And before we start with our second section, need for guidelines, effect of guidelines, what is needed additionally, it is time to kick off the first Q&A with the VoxR tool. So it is very similar to those who know Slido. It's just a different tool. Just try it out. You just click below our CVs on the website, below the stream, and you can start posting your questions now. I will submit them after this section, and now 3, 2, 1, the VoxR floor is yours, and I will return back to our guests. So, Wiebke, I already said it. You were responsible for the guidelines, for 2 very, very important guidelines. You named best practices in the guidelines dealing with collections from colonial context. Labeling something as a best practice presupposes a certain interpretative sovereignty. So what exactly constitutes a best practice in the museum world? Which criteria? You're laughing. We talked along in the preliminary talk. Which criteria did you use to select the practical examples?
Actually, we tried not to call it best practices because we thought we collect practice examples.
Yes, good
And
practices.
leave it to the reader which one really are good examples, because we are still learning institutions. But the idea was to collect practical examples from all over the world, not only from German museums, but also from others, because if you write a guideline, it's an overview and it's a bit theoretical, although it has to be a very practical day-to-day daily work guideline. The international experts we discussed this guideline with recommended to add an e-reader with practice examples, because nobody has to invent the wheel every time again and again. It's really good to read what others already did and see if it's possible to adjust to their own collection. So that's what we did in a reader, which is quite a complex thing already in all these fields of collecting, of preserving, exhibiting, return, but also other international guidelines which already exist, or in some countries we have laws and requirements, and this we all collected in this arena.
You told me in our talk that one has to assess also the influence of objects which are not looted, but which are from the colonial context, like their influence on the contemporary discourse. For example, racist illustrations on colonial goods, racist representation in colonial literature, or propaganda. How can museums contribute to clarification?
The first thing that museums have to realize that collections from colonial context are not only objects from former colonies or coming from other countries, and it's not only ethnographic collections, it's really all over the museums in Germany we find this, and to realize that colonial contexts are also reflected in objects which come from Germany. That you see it in art history, you see it in advertisements, in commerce. And really, we ask our colleagues to discuss this in their exhibitions, really to make it to a topic. Even if you don't have any collections relating to colonial context, it's still important to have this in your educational programs, to discuss it with visitors. We really, in Germany, we have to talk as much as we can about our colonial past, because it is still very unknown to many people, because it wasn't a part of the school curriculum for decades. And so we really have to work on that.
I totally agree, but this finding out who are we dealing with is still also prolonging the restitution process. So Malik, is this clarification, this urge for clarification, also a distractive strategy? You told me in the preliminary talk, nations are dealing with nations, full stop. So would you say, but we still have, I mean, Wiebke implies we have to look into it. We have to look after whom we are dealing with.
Yeah, thank you. I mean that the question of restitution have many levels. We have the scientific level, we have also the political level, we have level of activisms and so on. Those objects were looked in a context somehow where we did not have nation, actual modern nation. And those nations are constituted on the basis of, mixed aggregation of multiple communities. And these communities are today in modern states. Sometimes they have moved those communities. Sometimes they are in between many nations, many states. And sometimes the geography have also evolved. In all cases, there are entities that are formed, states, to represent them. And this is the reason why restitution has this very political dimension beyond the scientific one. Once the object is in the country, it is up to the state to see if the object joined the museum or the community. I agree that this kind of reflection is also complex, because in some country we can notice society that are not not in a good manner with the state, but we cannot make all the problem of restitution behind the temporality of scientific, of resource provenance, of a case by case, in my opinion, because I show you two examples. The restitution of the 26th object for Benin, from General Dodds, it was during the looting in Benin. And the sabre of El Hadji Omar, now, okay, we can say that it is not now legally a restitution, okay? But this sabre is inside the Museum of Black Civilization, and the people who are concerned by this sabre are in many countries, Mauritania, Senegal, and the South. And it is not a problem, even if it can exist. This problem does not have the scope that one wants to give out. One cannot take the example of the need to discuss directly with the community to delay the restitution process. So I admit, to conclude, I admit that the scientific take time. I admit that in some case, somehow we should step by step and make the problem case by case, but proportionally, the problem of case by case should be the, not the example, but the exception. So let's go directly, because you have many nations that now, that who are creating some commission of restitution, and many demand of restitution will go on the table at the political way. And we say and we know that many objects, it is easier to know where those objects come from. So putting the problem of case by case, putting the problem of provenance research will take so long time. And from European country, the history show that Africa, that there are many strategies sometimes to reach some solution without, with this very ambiguous, solution.
Okay, Emmanuel, I want you to react to that because, is it really possible to determine the origin of objects individually when we listen to Malik?
Yes, I think that the goodwill of the museum, my museum or other museum in Europe, is true. We are not trying to avoid the question by putting some process in between. I think there's a really understanding that's something important to do and to do it properly. So I think we'll achieve it. But it can take time, and it needs cooperation with the source country. We have, Malik was referring to the 26 objects which was restituted by the French Republic to the Republic of Benin, not the Benin city, but to the Republic of Benin. Because these 26 objects were looted. This was possible because we had time to work on this specific question 4 years ago, and somebody made a complete research on it. So we are quite sure that there's no other question around these 26 objects. I think we need this time all the time now we are trying to address the question also of this mission Malik was referring, the 1931 Dakar-Djibouti mission, which was a French scientific mission. And we have started with Malik and other colleagues in Africa to try to address the question altogether, not only on one side doing everything, but doing it on several sides. And that will be an interesting example. I hope we will be able to go to the end of this, and I'm quite sure that something very interesting will get out this kind of process. But again, it's something which has which is from one period of the past. several geographic entities, several culture, and that's the way we can deal with. It's we can't have what will be achieved for this case won't be the same for other cases, because the situation would be different in, for instance, in America in the 18th century when France was there, or in South America and Brazil, where some French colony was established in the 16th century there. So that's why I think we have to look at the question of history and the question of what we are talking about really. What kind of objects are we talking about really?
I hope that we can talk about your joint, your cooperation in the third section when we talk about community or source community relations, because it sounds really interesting. I just want to place one last question to you, Wiebke. Isn't the debate, I mean, we talked about it already, but I really want to share this with the audience. Isn't the debate not about much more fundamental questions of attitude and eye level? And can guidelines give a sufficient answer to this?
They can help. I think guidelines never are the complete answer. Guidelines are something to help, to really to give an idea what we are really talking about, to advise museum colleagues on this complicated issue, because as I said, we are not only talking about ethnological museums where colleagues very often are working internationally already, but we have 7,000 museums in Germany, and a lot of them host collections from Colonial Context, and they usually are not on this international path. So these guidelines should help. But and what we also hope that they open a debate which is not too emotional, really to really discuss this complicated issue and all of its complexity, not to try for the easy answers, but really to look that the museums are in a very difficult position here. It's politics, it's culture, it's heritage, but very often it's really politics and even international politics. And as Malik said, talking from nation to nation, this is even more complicated in Germany because the museums usually don't belong to the state. If I look to my museum, the Übersee-Museum Bremen, it's originally a city museum of the Free Hanseatic State of Bremen. Mm-hmm. The central government in Berlin has nothing to decide about the future of these collections. That's the government of the city of Bremen does. So it's not a question from nation to nation. And this is also what we try to explain in these guidelines, that the cultural system in Germany is very complicated. It's not centralized. It's different than it is in France, for example. And really to give an hint to this debate, but we are not giving a final answer. We just try to give an introduction into the complicated issue and help for the daily work with these kind of collections.
You're very right, Wiebke. Thank you so much. We experience the complexity of the German system and the pandemic pretty intense right now, the federal states. So you're very right, and it leads perfectly over to the questions of the participants of our audience. So I have one question now. Thank you very much for the second section. We will just have about 10 minutes now, or not really fully 10 minutes, for your questions, dear audience. Thank you very much that you posted some, or a lot, and I can probably choose two. Lars, that's for you. On the part of Nigeria, there's a demand for restitution via the ambassador. Why does the SPK, the Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz, still say that it is open to restitution? What role will the new trust play? That's a big one.
The new trust in Nigeria is the entity we are just dealing with now. And this is pretty recent. So this is exactly what Malik said. If you are just dealing with nations, you also need a partner who's just taking this part over in the country of origin. I'll just give you one example. aside from Nigeria, we also are dealing with our partners in Australia. Australia has a department in the Foreign Office, just connecting collections outside Australia and then dealing with the communities in the country. So the research might happen then much stronger in Australia itself, but still we have to research. Still it needs time to find out which community is responsible for which kind of collections. We again have, I would not say problems, but challenges also inside Europe. If you are talking about collections in Europe returning, we have, for example, recordings from the Basques, and we get requests from Spain and France at the same time. So we also have to decide how to deal with these kind of collections. Coming back to Nigeria, when you were just saying it's speeding up, there is a certain process of just giving a verbal note and asking for objects back. And this is something which is just, at least I hope so, will happen in the near future. And as I already said in the beginning, we want to talk with the people to find out what they are just expecting from us, how we are just proceeding, and what kind of time frame they are also expecting. As you know, they are just planning the new museum there in Benin, and definitely they want to have some of the objects for the exhibition, and this is something we are just negotiating at the moment. And then I think this process will just continue and take up speed, of course.
So you learn from your mistakes. I mean, the silence was too long, especially towards the ambassador, who made it very public. So, I mean, yes. This is also a question of communication or respect issues, I think, isn't it?
I think that there's a certain way of protocol from the outside. We won't have a verbal note that goes through the Foreign Office.
Okay.
So this is, again, about the legal thing, but we are just aware of all the comments, and we are definitely reacting on this.
Thank you very much, Lars. So I take the next question. I hope I can take two more. I think, to Emmanuel, does restitution mean that every single object is returned to its country of origin, or could some stay behind to continue stimulating interest in the countries where they are currently held? I think that should be for you.
Yeah, well, that's I can go back to my personal experience with the Kanak cultural heritage, which is held, of course, in New Caledonia, but held all over the world, and especially in Europe, in Germany, in the Americas. When we had our first international exhibition in the country of origin of several hundred of these objects, we asked our elders what do they think about this object being away, and they were asking how many objects do we have in the museum, and do we have enough objects to represent all the different cultures of our country, and then they were satisfied by that answer, and then they say these objects are like our ambassadors for outside. And it's good for us to be represented outside our own boundaries of our country. This is one way to answer. I think it's not something which could be a general attitude, but it's something which, in one time, in one particular situation, this was the idea, and we still work with this idea. In fact, in New Caledonia. And this is how we were able to develop a general inventory of all the objects held in the different museums in the world, which is a very important task to carry on, and very rich, because it gives you also a very different picture of what is your cultural heritage in museum. Because your own collection in your own country of origin is it's only a part of it. And when you deal with all the 1,000 objects held all over the world and you put it in the one database, it gives you a completely different vision of your culture. You change from a static vision to a very dynamic vision, and you see how much people were able to adapt during several hundred years, which is the timescape of scale of collections. So yes, restitution is something which deals with a sensitivity at one time. People need to have something which should be back because there is because it is important for them. But of course, when you have hundreds and hundreds of objects of the same culture, same period, it could be interesting also to have them scattered, and because it represents also it's your part of history, the way you share humanity, a part of a common history. I think, yeah, this is why it's interesting to have these kind of global collections. And I do hope that museum in Africa, for instance, because we have Malik with us, will be also able with to have the global also representation of all the human beings, and not only the one from your own country or your own region. So yeah, it's complicated.
So it's a bigger picture. It's the bigger picture.
To give a big, to have a bigger culture and feel also the importance of a very specific culture, but part of a global culture group.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Malik, I take you in the third section because I want to take one more question, which of course goes to Lars again. It's all for the Humboldt Forum. The Humboldt Forum and French state are trailblazers in restituting looted artifacts. Are you hoping to increase the pressure on organizations elsewhere, e.g. in the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, or Denmark? Very quick questions. We just ran out of time.
I think it's not our duty to increase the space, but definitely we are in contact with our partners and our colleagues in Europe, and we are discussing these issues. So this is something I think just talking and discussing among all the colleagues will definitely speed up something.
Okay, so that's a nice way to say we are putting more pressure. It puts more pressure on everybody, but it's okay. Thank you. You have to say that. Our third topic considers, as I said, the relationship between museums and source countries and communities. Oh, I forgot. Dear participants, it's again your turn. You can place your questions now again on the same tool. Below, if you just clicked in, below our stream, you can just click on Vox R tool and post your questions. We will take them in after this third section. Sorry. So, we want to talk about relationships between museums and source countries, communities. Malik, Wiebke, it's both to both of you. How should a museum interact with source communities? And, which is really important, I think is very important, which role do the diasporic or post-migrant communities play in this context in the European countries? Who wants to start? Otherwise, I nominate you. Malik, you are bending in front, so you start.
I think that, after all, it is about their culture and about their history. All the people who are in the diaspora can be really concerned by those objects. So those people should have a very specific role to play in the documentation of this object, in many things. But I return the question, because when we ask what or how the diaspora can take place in the affair of this object or in the museum, we should also know that museum must develop their policy. So I know that in Europe, in France, for example, Branly try and have a very big policy of cultural mediation. But if you want a diaspora play or source community play a role in the museum, we should change the museum. The museum should develop a policy of close communication addressed to those communities. where the object comes from. Because, you know, the notion of Europe is in evolution since the colonization. Africa is one part of Europe. When you are in Paris, there are some neighborhoods where we have Senegalese and Malian born there and who live there. They are part of the country. So the museum, or European Museum, should reflect this. They should also develop a recruitment policy to diversify their staff. They can also, and they should also develop a policy of cooperation with museum. I know that since the restitution question, many museums, European museums who detain ethnographic, what we call ethnographic collection, develop a very big and strong cooperation with African museum. So this is very important. And this cooperation should be, you know, in the level of politics, but also in the scientific level. It is very important about the interpretation of this object. And because also, you know, society where objects were before going out of the continent. Those societies, it is very important to have the evolution of how they interact or how they can interpret those objects. With the Museum of Quai Branly, for example, we are in the beginning of many projects of research on it. You know, on Emmanuel has mentioned the mission Dakar, Djibouti, and we are working on it. But, you know, to end this question here, the diaspora can interact and the source community can interact, but we should also have a transformation, a big transformation of European Museum.
Thank you very much, Malik. You addressed recruitment policies, which I think is very important, especially in the German context, where we still lack cultural personnel in the cultural institutions. I talked to you, Wiebke, about exactly about this issue. Which efforts are you bringing in now to, you know, let people participate from diasporic communities, from post-migrant backgrounds, because we are also talking about their culture of remembrance, after all.
Yeah, we do different things at the same time, doing one thing and not doing the forgetting the other. So yeah, we changed in our educational department the structure of how the people work and have now one colleague concentrating on community outreach work. So she's in a close contact with the diaspora communities in Bremen and the area around to figure out together with them in which way they can participate in our museum work, in which areas, and so it's just at the beginning that we changed that, because we already have different I'm looking for the English word for fiestas in Spanish, together with these communities, and have guided tours given by them. But we are looking for a more intimate way to work together, so that participation is more on a daily work basis. The other thing what we do is we just started to do a new concept on our Oceania exhibition, on the permanent one, and at the same time we create a complete virtual exhibition on Oceania. And for that we got the funding to have Samoan co-curator with us, and a cooperation with the National University of Samoa. And we are looking for ways also to invite people from other parts of Oceania, from where we have collections, to participate as well, which is quite a challenge. So the idea is that you always do the work, the research and the exhibitions and everything what's around the collections together with the communities of origin. But the reality is that the objects are really coming from all over the world, and we cannot cooperate with all over the world, not even with all the communities of origin where the Oceanian objects are stemming from. So we are in a search, how could we do this maybe on a virtual way, on the digital way? Is there a better possibility to engage communities of origin in our work and get into contact about our collections? And that's not only provenance research, which is important, but it's also the general understanding of these objects and their culture meaning, and also the ways we restore them in the museum, the way we exhibit them, to tell the stories together, to develop the major topics together, so that we really have a change of perspective in the collection, in the collection management and in the exhibition management. That's the goal. And the problem is that, and that's what we wrote in the guideline as a political issue. I think if Germany takes this whole debate seriously, we have to talk about the funding of the museums, because at the moment we have to find third people funding these kinds of projects. And if we don't find these funds, we are not able to engage anybody. And this cannot be the future of the German museums. So I really hope that there will be new possibilities for museums really to engage on a regular basis with people all over the world. That would be my dream of the ethnological museums of the future.
So, dear cultural policy decision makers, we don't want to rely on Drittmittel in Germany, as Wiebke said. Let's see what we can, which pressure we can build within this year. Thank you very much. For the glossary, I mean, we really want to be accessible, and I feel this you explained the co-creation concept very well. Dear audience, if you sometimes feel that you don't understand words, I promised the technical terms, just ask us. We are thinking about a glossary which is accompanying this series, so ask whenever you want. We all started one day to understand all these terms. Emmanuel, you worked for years with a close approach to source communities. Can you just suggest how do you establish a stable and reliable connection to source countries? Can you suggest a proper process? Is there this one process, or again, case by case in a different context?
It's much more easier to do it when your museum is in the country, where the cultures are. I think I was in Oceania and I was dealing with the Oceanic culture around the island where I was. And same thing for Australian Museum, New Zealand Museum, and so on. It's much more complicated when you are in Europe, where you are far away and you deal also with so many different cultures. As the Wiebke said, we have objects from all over the world, from a lot of different periods. So again, I think this is the question of network between museums, because museums in each country are the real place to deal with for this question of relationship with source communities, because themselves, they are the closest partner for us. And if I try to deal something with, I'm interested in a source community somewhere in the world, I will first deal with the museum, the National Museum, where it is based, because they would know much more than I do about the local politics also, and the local situation, sometimes very complex. And when you are an outsider, you come from abroad, it's not easy to understand and who you are talking to, and what kind of answer you can take to granted, and what others which you should not take for granted. So I really think that this is the network between museums within Europe also, but networks we can build each of us, because our colonial history is different in different places in Europe. Germany has its own colonial history, and France has its own, British has its own, and so on. And this is how we can work together and then work with the source countries, but through the museum. And this is why it's very important to have exchange of staff and professionals. I really think that if we want to achieve something, we have to have people who know more about the different culture we are dealing with. And we try, for instance, in the Branly Museum, we try to invite, we have a special grant to invite professionals from the country where, for instance, the question of restitution was raised to come and work with us, know more about our own collection, and work with us to solve the case, or to try to find the best way to answer the question for the benefit of the culture. Because sometimes what we look at something which looks like important from the point of view of Europe, it's not the same way people would address the question in their own situation. So that's very important to have this going on exchange of people who can. That's a dream where you can start your career in one country, and then you go to another, and then you go to another. And that's, I think that will be a very interesting thing for museum, being a very large space of dialogue, cultural dialogue.
Okay,
and
that was a good
to make
keyword.
Cultural dialogue, you mean people.
That was a good keyword when you said the change of perspective, or sometimes it's a different point of view when you look at what is important. I just want a short statement from you, Malik, because you work together on a joint project, on a cooperation. How does it work there? So you're working together from different countries on one big book. Can you just give us a small, brief outline how this works? And then we have to go to the next questions.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it will be very difficult to be inside all the axes of our research because, as I say earlier, we just began some project. It's the Museum of Branly when Emmanuel was at the head of this institution. So we this axis will be like itinerant exhibition. So we are on one exhibition that we will held with the Museum of Branly and the Museum of Black Civilization, in which we will also have some object, the Ethnological Museum. How we can work together is also in the axis of research. So, you know, because the Museum of Branly have a department of research, and we are at university museum, so we are in the research field. So these two axes are axis on which we are working on.
Thank you very much, Malik. I have, again, questions for you. This is the last question set, and then we are already almost at the end, which is a pity, because we could go on for hours and talk to you. Wiebke, Lars, this is an open question. What's the role of collective colonial guild in the exhibition practices of Humboldt Forum? I can take two answers from a different point of view. Wiebke, do you want to know? She doesn't want. So Lars, it's all up to you.
So we just said we are transparent. So we will definitely tell the story of colonialism. We will definitely tell what we are researching just on, because as you know, and as we already had discussed, the deeper you go into the subject, the more details comes out. And this is definitely something we have to share. We have to be open, we have to be transparent, and this is also the basic for just returning objects, discussing with our colleagues abroad and finding out solutions. We should not, and this is my personal opinion, we should not hide our history.
That's definite and clear. I hope it won't happen that we hide, but we are still within the debate, so I don't think this is the issue that we are hiding, but how are we dealing with it? This is what we are going to cover in the next few months. Are there any best practices for the resocialization of an object, Malik?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they have one answer to this question and one practice of how we must resocialize objects. I come back to what we said earlier, that every single object is a singularity. So Emmanuel has opened with that. So, and every object plays a specific role in their society. And every museum also, or every community, have its single way to deal with that object. So I don't think that we can have one best practice, but we have some practice that we, testify and that works. So a resocialized object, if this object have a very big symbolic importance in the society, mean that this object take place again in the process of socialization of this society. So we can imagine that an object is returned in the museum and that the museum, loan this object for one time. We can also, even if the research can be also one part of the socialization of this object. So the fact that the object of the sabre of Elijah Omar is now in the Museum of Black Civilization, you cannot imagine how this object is at the heart of this society, of this imaginary, of this school we can come and of many people who can interact with this and replace this object in the heart of this economy of the society. We can also, and it is one of the points that I used to practice, how to make the object interact with contemporary artists that live in the country. So Senegalese artists are very, African artists or Senegalese artists, if even it is in Mali or in South Africa, all this continent, not only Senegal. So all these artists can interact with the object that are in a museum. And it is wonderful if these artists come from the community where the object come from. Sometimes it is very difficult for the artist to interact with this object if it is a ritual object, if it is an object with, you cannot deal with it. But the problem of contemporary art is that sometimes, this object, even if in the discussion are very sensitive and are very complex, sometimes it's very emotional because the relationship with the object is emotion. When we deal only with the object through science, through our research, sometimes we don't have the answer of all the questions we raise because it is very sensitive. And it is in this breach that the contemporary artist can act and can, make solution and maybe illuminate many answers that the scientific cannot reach.
So it builds relevance with the connection to contemporary artists, which I think is a wonderful idea to re-socialize objects. Thank you very much, Malik. Wiebke Ahrndt, I still have a question for you now addressed to you. Don't you think, Professor Ahrndt, that guidelines are favoring European museum institutions on dealing with colonialism topic and somehow distracting restitution movement to former colonies?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's several chapters in these guidelines dealing with the question of restitution and the question of law involved. And we even opened up the discussion that we said that what we always talk about is in wrongfully acquisition. We are talking about looting art, which should be returned, and I totally agree on that, and we do in the guideline as well. But what we also address, that we should look at the meaning of the objects, and that there might be, or probably there are, situations where it doesn't matter how an object came to our collection, but what it did mean to the community of origin when it left the country, or what it means maybe today, and that it might be a good idea to return it to the country of origin, despite the fact that it might be acquired legally, or maybe we don't know how it came to Germany, but that it's the meaning of the object. So we even opened up the debate, which we talk about here as well. We said we open up and say we need another form to work together. And we need another form of cooperation, because that's what I like to add here as well. We should open up our debate and ask a question: how do we want to live together today and in the future? And the collections and the return of a collection is no meaning in itself. It is an important sign, but it is also a starting point for something new, and we should start to talk about what's coming next.
That's, I think, a prosperous last comment, starting time. Dear participants, thank you very much, Wiebke. Dear participants, time has been flying. We are almost at the end. And I have to ask my guests now for the final statement. It's really, it just ran the time, I think, Lars. But dear guests, you have 1 minute sharp to answer my final question. And I start with you, Malik. If a ferry would come across your department of museums and you had 3 wishes, what would they be? Everybody wants the ferry question.
Thank you. The first one is to bring back to Africa all the symbolic witness, or not all, but the symbolic witnesses of the creative genius of society and part of our history. The second one maybe will not be wished, will not be solved, is to restore the lost knowledge encoded in this object, which are memorial and historical archive. Mm-hmm. And the last thing, it will maybe for scientific literature, because I talk about knowledge, how it will be, the ferry will have a good, very big job, because she will rebalance the scientific literature and the international normative text about cultural and heritage, because this cultural heritage is deeply roots in the cultural and intellectual history of Western society.
So it's a decolonization wish, actually. Thank you very much, Malik. Emmanuel, I'm very sorry you don't get a ferry question. You get a different question. You were laughing. If you look at the number of provenance researchers at the Ethnological Museum here and compared to the Branly Museum, what would you suggest the cultural policy decision makers in Germany to do to speed up the restitution process?
Well, I don't know how many officers are working on it. We don't.
4.
4. Wow, 4. Lucky you.
How many do you have?
Only 1. And this is pointing the very important point raised by Wiebke about funding, because we have a lot of talk about the necessity that we need also fund for provenance research, but fund also for international cooperation, which it was said. I think what has been achieved by the Humboldt Forum, and which we will be interesting to be part of it, if the network you seem to have started to establish between European Museum and provenance researchers, especially on the question of dealers. Because this is a big link, because a major link between our museum. In the past, many objects were acquired not directly in source communities in the countries, but through dealers and international meeting and so on. And that's a very interesting thing that we should work together. But I do think that there is something to be done at the European level to help this process of knowledge and restitution to be done.
So you see, dear participants, all the guests are addressing corporations working together. We should stick to that. But now, the closure question to Wiebke. I know you don't want to write a new guideline ever again. So in an ideal world, Wiebke, how would your written guides, be best used and constantly further developed?
I mean, there are definitely in a couple of years a different view on certain topics, because we are still learning, and the discussions with people from other parts of the world further develop. So I really hope there will be a certain further development, and I already know a topic where the next open space is how do we deal with the images we put online, because we all said we want to transparent, so we have to put our collections online. But actually, there's several open questions regarding the copyright of the photos of the objects. And I think this is something which should be discussed in the next step, but it doesn't have to be discussed by me, of course.
Yeah, the copyright question is a big one. Thank you very much, Wiebke, for this last statement. So you get a twofold question again, like in the beginning, Lars. After this discussion today, in your personal ideal Humboldt Forum world, how will the Ethnological Museum change in the future? And are there lessons learned from today?
I will start with the second one. Definitely there are lessons learned.
Yeah.
And what I learned is that we have to be in constant dialogue with all the colleagues. And I really hope that, let's say, in 2 years, we will have a second series and discussing about first results and further projects and results. And the ideal museum for me would be a much more open house in cooperation, topic you were just addressing several times today. Cooperation with all our partners, source communities, stakeholders, just name them, in the house, working on the collection, finding solutions for the future perspectives of all these objects we have in.
Thank you very much, Lars. I think we would all love to come to an open house and hope that we can do that within this year and not next year. Let's hope. Dear guests, thank you very much for your really inspiring, your sharing, your inspiring knowledge, your expertise, that you stood by us and answered the questions. Thank you very, very much. Stay with us. You are still online and you can still be seen. Dear Michael, the curator, dear Lars Koch, and dear Mr. Dogalou, thank you very much for hosting this very first discussion hybrid in the Humboldt Forum. It was quite an effort, and I think we made a start. It was exciting, inspiring, and really intense. Dear participants in front of the screens, thank you so much for your engagement in the debate. I'm sorry that I couldn't take every question, but we will think about using them later in a different format, as I announced. If you want, let's meet again on Thursday, the 13th of May. Then we will discuss more about provenance. As I said before, we will dig deeper into the matter of provenance research and object biographies. And I have to repeat or add one other announcement. If you came in later and didn't see Mr. Dogalou's announcement at the beginning, if you have gained taste for our discourse event, there will be already one next week on Thursday, 22nd. Same time, 7 o'clock. It's called Ortstermin, and it will focus on topics from the multifaceted history and present at the place. The series starts with the Humboldt Forum's first inclusive publication, and it's moderated by the wonderful former TV presenter Sherry Reeves, known to many of you as the former Wissen macht A moderator. It's now time to say goodbye. Thank you for your attention. Take care and stay safe. Good night.